My name is Jeff Dawsey. I am 37 years old and I am a pastor. This is my story. So I was born in Dothan, Alabama, but I grew up in Crestview, Florida, which is in the Panhandle by Pensacola, Tallahassee, stuff like that. My particular neighborhood was called Sunset Village. A lot of bad role models. Somebody was smoking crack, somebody was selling crack, somebody was smoking weed, a lot of people were selling weed. You know, everybody was doing something pretty much. I can't tell you a lot of success stories that came out of Sunset Village. 11th grade, I decided that I was gonna drop out of school. Already, I was skipping, almost every single day of school. My house was, what people know as the trap house. It's where everybody would sell the drugs and stuff like that. People would just come to my house and that's where I would make the transactions. And so I felt like I was probably losing money when I was going to school. And I felt like that was gonna be my life.
You give them hope because you have transcended, Leslie.
Around the same time where I dropped out, I started watching this movie called The Hurricane. It's about this boxer, Reuben Hurricane Carter, who gets wrongfully convicted of murdering some white people during the 60s. He gets 3 life sentences without parole. While he's in prison, he writes his autobiography. And a few years later, it ends up getting published. And several years after that, this kid who was living in New York named Lesra, he was attending this educational program run by these Canadians. And they see something special in Lesra, and so they take him back to Canada. And one of the first things they do is they take him to a bookstore. And of all the books at the bookstore, he just so happens to grab Reuben's book. And long story short, in about 15, 20 years, they prove Reuben's innocence because they had developed a relationship while Reuben was in prison. And so anyways, this kid, because he decided to pick up a book, all these things happened, all the events that took place happened. So many people's lives are changed, all because that kid decided to read a book. I was looking for a cigarette lighter. And I walked into my kitchen and opened up the drawer, and there's this orange pocket Gideon Bible just staring me in the face. And the thought comes into my head, I wonder how many lives you'd save if you read this book. And after having, watched the movie for almost 2 months and seeing the power of a book, I grabbed that book, found my cigarette lighter, lit up me some weed, and I started reading Matthew. And for 3 hours, I read the whole book of Matthew. The next day, I read the whole book of Mark. And every day, I'm reading hours and hours of the Bible. Like, I could not stop reading the Bible. And even when I wasn't reading the Bible, I was watching the Christian preachers on TV all the time, Christian movies. Like, that literally became my new thing. I need to know more. I want to know more. Just beginning to understand Jesus and God in a way I never had before. Like, it just really began to change my life, because no longer did I want to, just have sex with any girl. No longer did I want to smoke anymore. No longer did I want to use profanity. I didn't want to do anything that I knew God wasn't pleased with. And so it changed me. I made a complete 180. Everybody was surprised that this guy who was just this seemingly happy young man was now just this person who was in love with Jesus and wanted to talk about him all the time. And so the fact that, it all started from me smoking and reading is crazy. At the end/beginning of 2006, I went back into it. I started selling more drugs and I got back into horrible relationships and all that stuff. For a half a year, I was back in it, but I was different though, because I would pray to God and I would say to him, God, I don't know how I'm gonna get out of this life, and I don't even know if I want to, but I do know that you called me to preach. And so I'm not gonna hide my drugs, because I do believe you're sovereign. I believe you're in control. And I know if you want the cops to find them, then they'll find them. So I always used to tell them, I guess I'll just be preaching in prison. I looked forward to that as almost like a freedom, because of course I didn't want to sell drugs, because I had my relationship with God, but at the same time I didn't know how to stop. And in hindsight, there was some deep trauma and pain in my life that, that weed and all the other toxic stuff I was doing was my medication. And I hadn't surrendered those things to God yet. Yeah, so I'm back in it and I'm flowing, and I honestly, I don't see a stopping point in sight. But the end of June 2006, my cousin, his girlfriend, ends up getting saved, and she is scheduled to get baptized at this church July 2nd, 2006. And so leading up to that week, I was asking her all these different questions about baptism, like how are you gonna feel when you get out the water? What do you think it's gonna make you feel like? Because remember, I was a Christian, but I didn't go to church, and so I didn't get baptized. I was a Christian in my room. And so I was just so interested in, how she was gonna feel and what it was gonna do to her. And so that Thursday I was like, you know what, I'm gonna go watch you get baptized. But that Saturday, a friend of mine who used to hang out with me every single day, he stole $4,000 from me. And my cousin had some guys from Arkansas who were working with him, and they were some pretty bad guys. And so I had met with two of them, and I was like, hey, I'll give you guys $1,500 a piece if you get this guy, you tie him up to a tree, torture him, and kill him. And their response to me was, you ain't gotta pay us that much because we wouldn't even like the dude. And I was like, man, I'm asking you guys to kill somebody. I think $1,500 is, more than reasonable. And I was like, you know what, just wait on my cue. And, Sunday comes, July 2nd, of course I don't want to go to church. I have murder on my mind. And so as far as I was concerned, I wasn't going to go watch that girl get baptized, but she called me and she was like, hey, I'm like less than 5 minutes away from your house. And so I ended up going to church. And when I got there, I was literally just focused on the church stuff, and then altar call comes after the service, and everybody's standing up. But when altar call's there, I say in my head, I pray in my head, and I say, God, I gotta get my life right, and then I'm gonna come back to you. And not even 2 seconds later, man, I say that in my head. The pastor says out loud to everybody, it's not about you getting your life right and coming to God, it's about you coming to God and allowing Him to get your life right. And I felt like God spoke to me. I felt like He was talking directly to me. And so I ended up walking forward, and I, ended up rededicating my life, and I got baptized too. The funny thing is, right when I got home, the guy who stole the money, he came back and acted as if he didn't steal the money. Of course, he didn't think that I knew he did it. We both were playing it off over the next few weeks as if nothing happened. But he didn't know the battle started in my head, like, am I gonna have this guy killed? But I had just rededicated my life to God, and so there were certain days I would wake up and the guys would be around and be like, we're waiting on you, man. And I'll be like, you know what, today might be the day. But I'm reading the Bible again, I'm praying again. I'm like, and then I'm actually going to church now. And so over the next 2 weeks, I really battled whether I was gonna have him killed tonight. And we didn't talk about this until about 8 years later. I actually reached out to him on Facebook, and I asked him if he had stolen the money, and he told me he did. And so we mended our relationship, and I actually began to mentor him from there. And I pointed him in the right direction of a church for his family, and several years later, he and his whole family got baptized in that church. And so that was one of the huge blessings of my life, being able to not only forgive him, but to see his family come to Jesus together and to see them just growing and stuff like that. 8 years later, 2014, I guess it became official, what I felt September 2005, that God had called me into ministry. I got ordained at First Baptist Church of Palm Coast as a pastor on September 18th. Yeah, it was surreal to get this calling when I was 19 and to finally become official at 30. I thought it was really cool. My best friend, he surprised me all the way from Dallas, Texas. My family came into town and friends. And so, it was really special, man, because I had been walking into pastoral ministry for many, many years. And so to just, again, have that cemented time, that moment was really cool. Yeah, 2 years ago, I actually prayed to God that He would either allow me to get fired or He would allow me to quit being a pastor. And that was the very first time in my life in the last 19 years of me being a Christian that I felt like I didn't want to be a pastor anymore. And it was because, I had some secrets in my heart. I was scared that if I told God that he was gonna disown me or what have you, and I had just burned myself out. But what God did for me was he led me to this place where I just confessed all of the secrets to him. And it really emptied my heart of just all of the burdens that I have been carrying for so long. And it taught me how to pray about every single thing. And so the reason why I wanted to just share that is because there's so many Christians who love God, who love people, and who are doing ministry and things, but they haven't learned how to pray about the things that they're scared to talk about, even with God. But what he's shown me is, like, he is the safest place in the world. There isn't a wife, there isn't a husband, there isn't a friend, there isn't a counselor, there isn't a priest who's safer than God with our secrets and with our flaws, because, he loved me through it, and he's only grown me in ways in the last 2 years that I just didn't even think God was capable of. And so I want everybody, whoever hears this and who knows me, to just, offer to God the ugliest stuff of your heart and prioritize them. Because whenever you begin to do that, God, as promised, will give you fulfilling peace, and he'll always use the stuff that we give to him as weapons that we can use for his glory.
You're only getting braver, you're only getting